People often fantasize about trying out different, far better lifestyles, but few actually change the way that they live. Social commitments, habit systems, and inertia stop most people and their dreams cold. They just don't know that all it takes to realise a fantasy is a small amount of money, a bit of luck, and a whole lot of courage. Cutting ties that have taken a lifetime to form is a draining experience, and throwing away professional security and all that it's supposed to bring you in terms of convenience is like losing a piece of oneself. But for me, the change was like crawling out of an old, outworn skin. I decided that we really needed to find some place in a hilly country, a wood for heating and cooking, and most important, isolation. Just promise me that you'll think about it seriously for a while. After all, wouldn't you like to live in your own kind of castle in the country? This letter was written at one of the most photographed crime scenes in the world. A place of horror, death, and destruction. Wouldn't you like to live in your own kind of castle in the country? Welcome to Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. Nice to be recording a new episode. I'm here with my sometimes occasional co-host, Alfie, my guest vocalist on the odd episode. Thank you for getting in touch about the last episode. And just in general, it's great to hear from you. Thank you very much for anyone who's got in touch. If I haven't replied to you yet, I am getting there. I will get around to replying, fear not. Okay, the story for this episode. This story is new to me, but it's not a new story. It has been covered. When I was researching, I realised lots of other podcasts have done it, and I don't always love to do stories done by other podcasts, but my God, it's bloody good. It's such a good story. So, before we start the story, let's just do a couple of quick shout-outs, okay? So, firstly, hello to Robin Linder, who sent me an email which gave me a small minor heart attack when I read the beginning of it. It said, Barry, I am extremely frustrated with you. And I thought, oh no, what have I done? I've said somebody's name wrong, I've got a place name wrong, I've said that somebody committed a murder and they didn't, or I've done something really stupid. And actually no, Robin was just being lovely and saying she's extremely frustrated because she binge listened Extraordinary Stories, and when she got to the end she tried to do a search to find a similar style podcast and couldn't find it, and was just saying basically that's a bit frustrating, but thank you for your lovely work. Well, thank you for your lovely words, Robin. Hello to, now let's get this name right. Hello to Michelle Michelle Batagliad. That's the best go I can give that surname. Hello Michelle, you're in Canada. How are you? Okay, and the final one. We have a 40th birthday, and that is long time listener to the podcast, Amy Doherty. Happy birthday, Amy. Happy 40th. Hope you have an amazing time. Alright, shout outs over. Let's get on with the story. Quick warning, it is gruesome. There are some disturbing parts to this story. That's your warning. Are you ready? Okay, let's go. Now, the text you heard me read in the beginning, that was from an essay called Castle in the Country. And I'll be reading a little bit more of that as the story progresses. But the all-important question is this: who wrote that essay? Well, it was written by a man called Dr. Charles Scudder. Scudder makes me laugh because in Glasgow, right, scud means like, or is a word for being naked. So I would say, I was running about in the scud. So every time I see Dr. Charles Scudder, this image of this man running around naked. Anyway, who was Dr. Charles Scudder? He was a man who lived in Georgia in the late 1970s. Now, Charles worked as a doctor of pharmaceuticals at a nearby university, and he earned some good money. He was married and he had 4 sons. So Charles lived with his wife and his 4 sons in a fairly modest house. So Charles's wife didn't work. She didn't have to, actually. Charles earned good money at the university. Now, although he earned good money, he was very careful with it, and he would put money aside each month. So it sounds, does it not, like a fairly normal setup? Man, wife, 4 sons. Well, it is normal in that sense, except there is one other factor in this living situation which makes it slightly different from, well, say the neighbouring houses. The Scudder family had their own live-in cook, stroke handyman, stroke servant, and all-round helper, labourer guy. And he was called Joe Odom. Joe Odom was a middle-aged man who had, in his youth, right, he'd gotten into some trouble with police, not for anything terribly serious. You know, a little bit of stealing when he was a teenager, here and there. And Joe we'd never really gotten an education, or a full education anyway. He worked various sort of low-paying jobs here and there. So when Charles met Odom years before, he said to him, look, hey, why don't you move into my house with my family and you can, cook for us. You can help out with the gardens. You can help out around the house should we need any odd jobs done. So Joe Odom absolutely jumped at this chance. And now, here's what we really need to get to the heart of. What exactly was that relationship between Charles and Joe? Was it that Charles was the man of the house and Joe was the hired help? Were they equals? Friends? Well, no. They were lovers. Joe was 13 years younger than Charles. When they initially met, many, many years ago, in a secret speakeasy in Georgia, which is a place for, or was traditionally, a place for married gay men to go, or, gay men who lived in secret to go. They had met at a speakeasy in Georgia. Charles and Joe, well, they had just fallen for each other fast, and they quickly began a sexual relationship. And now, this was difficult because obviously Charles was married, he had 4 sons, but what he really wanted was to actually spend his life with Joe, but that was very difficult because of the time, of society pressures. It just made it very, very difficult. So the only way that Charles could really find a solution to the situation was to say to Joe, let's come up with the you come and be employed in my house plan, and that way you can live in my house and you can always be around. I mean, essentially what he's done is he's moved his lover into his house under his wife and children's nose. So the arrangement went on for years and years. And in that time, Charles's wife, she took unwell and she died. And now the situation was that you now had the 2 men living with Charles's 4 sons. But the 4 sons by now, they were all grown up and they were getting ready to leave the house and go and live their own lives. They were all reaching that sort of adult age where, they were like 18, 19, 20. They were about to go off and start their own adventures and do things in their own life. So Charles, he's now 50 years old. His wife is dead, his son's grown up and left. And Joe, his lover, in his late 30s, this was now their chance. This was now their moment to live the life that they wanted to live. So what did they want? What did Charles and Joe want for their life? Well, they wanted to get somewhere that was their own place. They wanted to have somewhere that they could call their own. Charles writes in his essay, "The only person I really had to consider before making a move was my loyal friend and housekeeper Joe, who for 17 years had cooked for us, me and my boys, and he'd cared for us. It seemed out of the question for me to ask Joe to move to a pretty ticky-tacky house in the suburbs, because he seemed to have an inherent dislike for anything modern. Furthermore, I knew I could never live in an apartment, a type of dwelling which I consider to be only slightly better than a prison. So I wondered, where shall we go? And what shall we do? And with the little money I had, it provided the impetus for change. I made up my mind. Why not make a clean break now? Let's get back to basics. Let's be poor." After some soul-searching conversations with Joe, I decided that we really needed to find some place in the hilly country with the glamour of 4 seasons, but without super cold winters, with a good supply of pure water and wood for heating. And most importantly, with a measure of isolation. After years of enduring the sensory overload of city life, I desperately wanted to be situated where I could neither see nor hear my neighbours. Remember, as this story develops, please remember the really important line that Charles says here in his essay. Somewhere with a measure of isolation. I mean, that is the complete opposite to what I want in life. I need to know everybody's business. I need to know everything that's happening all the time. I just couldn't deal with that. Just the sheer isolation. If I can't be looking at people and trying to work them out, then I don't know what the hell go on in my brain. It's part of the reason I like going to work. It's because then I can be like looking around at people and going, he appears to be wearing the jumper he was wearing yesterday at work. I guess someone didn't go home. I wonder who he's sleeping with. I can't do it. I couldn't do that. Anyway, what did they do? So Jo and Charles, they begin to search the surrounding areas for somewhere that they might want to live. And really what they're looking for here is, they're looking for somewhere that's almost just like a bit of land where they can build something from scratch. They want to build their own house. They want to make it, design it, build it, and just, create their own place. Charles writes, I resigned from the school, I auctioned off all the furniture and my possessions, and I didn't care about giving my things away. I sold my property, and I arranged for a moving company to take charge of the things that I wanted to keep. Then Jo and I, plus my 2 English Mastiffs, left for our kingdom. Cutting ties that have taken a lifetime to form is a draining experience, and throwing away all security and supposed convenience is like losing a piece of oneself. But for me, the change was like crawling out of an old, outworn skin. So you can really tell that for Charles, he was really like, get rid of everything. I don't want things. I just want Jo and my 2 dogs. That's all I want. And that's essentially what these 2 men wanted, was just to get away, get somewhere that was a piece of land, they could build something on it, and that would be their own place. There's something else worth knowing about Charles and Jo at this point. When it came to religion in their life, they were both members of the Church of Satan. Charles and Jo had no issues when it came to talking about religion and stating that they were Satanists. Now, when actually questioned on it, what they would say is that they would say that actually, this just gets confusing, they would say they were atheists, but that they had joined the Church of Satan as an adventure, just to see what it was all about. I mean, okay, just to see what it was all about. I find that odd. I mean, I'm not being funny, but is there not another way? Or, well, I don't know, maybe there isn't. But joining the Church of Satan just because you were interested to see what it was all about seems a bit extreme. I mean, it's not like, right, say, I guess, I mean, like, I'm kind of interested in, like, what veganism is all about. Right? Not that I'm planning to become a vegan, but, maybe I would. Maybe, who knows, right? But I'm not saying I'm curious enough about it that I'm suddenly going to start, joining lots of vegan groups and protesting against leather all of a sudden. You'd do a bit of research, wouldn't you? You'd just be a bit like, I wonder what that's like from a distance, and then kind of consider it and think, could it be a part of my life? Whatever. You wouldn't just be like, oh, do you know what? I really wonder what that Satanism stuff's all about. I bet it's really good. I know. Quick, let's join the church. Anyway, that is what they did. They met fellow Satanists and they began to collect objects with devil's heads on them, and they were really into like quite graphic gothic art. Quite graphic gothic art. Fuck me, that's a mouthful, said the actress to the bishop. Oh, I need some sort of like shit joke. I need like a because it's just a shit joke. So, the Satanism aside for a moment, said no one ever, what do Charles and Jo actually do about the desire to live somewhere else? in a place of their own? Well, they'd found a bit of land that was about 40 miles away from Charles's house, and this they decided was where they were going to build their new home. So with the two dogs they had, the Mastiffs, beautiful dogs they had, they set off to this new place of residence. Now, how to describe it? Have you ever seen the Blair Witch Project? Remember the really creepy forest? Think of that. If you've not, just picture a creepy forest from a horror film and you'll be quite close. It was in a fairly deserted area of Georgia, up near some mountains, and just what they wanted, miles away from anyone. Now the land was all that they had. They had no house yet, but this piece of land was exactly where they wanted to live. Fine, all they've got to do now is build a house. Charles says, "What an exhilarating, unsettling and strange rebirth it was. Joe, the dogs and I, we left the city during an icy blizzard. We lost our way several times in the course of the trip. We couldn't find the area, but when we did reach the area, we spent the night parked and very, very lost in our lives. And after we had located that patch of land, the storm, it grew worse. For the next few days we were alone and stranded in the wilderness. And we had begun our new life by melting snow for our water supplies. In the blizzard-bound quiet, we faced up to the incredible amount of work that loomed ahead of us and the fact that we had so much to learn. The nuts and the bolts of it are this. There was nothing on this stretch of land, and the two men, they built it together. They lived in a van which they parked on the land while brick by brick they began to construct what was to become known as Corpsewood Manor. Corpsewood Manor. Okay. Now I know they're big fans of the Satanism malarkey, but seriously, you're calling your house Corpsewood Manor. Okay, sure. Do we think for a second that good things are going to happen in 1979 in a creepy house in a forest called Corpsewood Manor? No, I don't think so. I think there's going to be trouble. Over to you, Charles. Take it away. As we cleared the forest and built by hand our house, we celebrated each achievement with a bottle of homemade wine. The following list defines a few of our most memorable days. We dug trenches and installed pipes for sinks. Using only hand tools, we dug the excavation for the house's foundation, lined it with bricks and filled it with concrete and boulders. We used 45,000 bricks to raise the walls of the house. By the end of the first summer, we were able to move in to the first floor, which contained the kitchen, the dining room and the living room. During the second year, we put a roof over our 2 upstairs bedrooms. Within 2 short years, we were living in an elegant mini castle. We used many homegrown and foraged food products, and our meals must certainly be amongst the best in the world. It's taken them 2 years. It's taken them 2 years and a hell of a lot of bricks and a hell of a lot of lifting and carrying and doing a lot of stuff, but they've got there. They've built this home for themselves. They've built Corpsewood Manor. Now, this is where it all gets a bit tricky, right? Because this story really sits on a knife edge at this point for me, and well, yeah, I think it's why it's such a fascinating and interesting story and why it's been documented and covered so widely. This could be me essentially just telling you a really lovely story of how two men defied the pressures of society and, defied the fact that being gay wasn't accepted and part of their world, and ran off and built this home from scratch. That could be the story. But it's not. There is a darkness lurking under this story, and there is a reason why in 1982 Corpsewood Manor would become one of the most notorious and photographed crime scenes in the world. So Corpsewood Manor is a spacious and very comfortable home, albeit with no electricity, as neither Charles nor Joe believed in electricity. I mean, they believed in Satanism, but electricity, no, that's a step too far. No, don't believe in that. What are you talking about? So they cooked and they heated everything with fire. Very manly. Lovely. Now, outside of the house, they kept a chicken coop for their chickens. Next to the chicken coop, there was another small building that existed, and it had been built in the same style as the rest of the house. However, it just happened to be separate from the house. This was known by Charles and Joe as the Pink Room. So this whole little separate building which sat on their property next to the chicken coop, just a wee bit away from the house, is known as the Pink Room. The Pink Room. Sounds lovely. If you like pink, that is. Well, I guess the question is, what was it? And why was it separate from the house? Oh, well, that's my question anyway. Well, to begin with, the intention of the Pink Room, it was to be a place to store the couple's pornography collection. Eh? How much porn have they got? My God. Go digital. Get yourself a Pornhub account. Well, actually, I suppose that's unfair. It was late 1970s. The internet hadn't been invented. So it would have all been magazines and videos. But wow, that must have still been some collection. Right, so that's what the Pink Room was first used for. But Charles and Joe, well, they developed upon the idea of the room, and they decided it would become their, for want of a better way to put it, their sex room, their sex dungeon, if you will, although it's not really a dungeon, because it's not underground, it's built on their land. In the Pink Room, they had a bed, they had a mattress, and they had the paraphernalia that they needed. You see, Charles and Joe were heavily into BDSM. And this meant that they had a really large collection of whips, chains, gags, toys, ropes. So the Pink Room, it had this kind of faint, dusty pink tinge to its colour. And in the walls, they had carved some satanic art. There were some devil's heads carved into the wall. And there were some devil's heads carved into the bed frame. Now, I must just tell you about this one thing which hung in the Pink Room. It was a painting. So it was a gift, right? It was a painting that Joe had done himself, right? He'd sat down and he'd painted this. as a gift for Charles. And I can't help but think if you were presented with the gift of this painting, you might just want to run away. Joe presented his partner Charles a painting of Charles's head with his eyes closed, tape around his mouth, and blood pouring from his head. Okay, let's just let's just think about that. Imagine that's what your loved one gives you. A painting of you dead. Right then. I don't know what I'd say. I'd be like, you know what? It's lovely. It's really nice, but I don't know where on earth it could hang. I'm just going to pop it in a cupboard for now, and we'll hopefully never see it ever again. Except Charles loved it. He absolutely loved the painting of his own dead face. So he hung it up as soon as he could, and he hung it in the pink room. With the building almost completed, just a few wee final details to go here and there, the two men and the two dogs, they've settled into their home and they're quite happy. And this was really all that they ever wanted, was to be together and live the life that they wanted. And I'm not going to skip past the BDSM and, you know, their sex life part of the story, because, well, there's no point. If that's how they've chosen to live, then live and let live, or whatever the phrase is, live and let, yeah. It's tricky, right? Because the BDSM stuff and how they chose to live life sexually is going to become a massive, massive factor in what happens in their story. So, you know, I don't want to sound as if it sounds like I'm in any way judging them for the choices that they made. I'm a fuck. I'm not judging them in the slightest. Live your life the way you want to live. Okay? There's one more thing that Charles and Joe shared a love of, and that was the drug LSD. Remember I told you that Charles had been a professor of pharmaceuticals, and as such, he had access to people who produced LSD, and, you know, he knew what went into the making of it. And so even long before they built Corpsewood Manor, him and Joe, they would take LSD and they would use it during sex sometimes. Now, you know, it wasn't always that kind of life. They just, in many ways, lived like a normal couple. You know, it wasn't all about sex and drugs and Satanism all the time. Charles writes this: "We live in grand style, on a little over $200 a month. We have no electricity, no phone, and no television, but we don't miss those things. We owe no one. This morning, I picked fresh raspberries to go along with our whole wheat pancakes. And tonight, I may practice my harp. Or perhaps I'll sit in the courtyard and listen to the tree frogs and the whirlpools while bats fly and the clouds drift across the moon. The world that is around me now is fresh, quiet, and very beautiful." I mean, I'm not sure if maybe Charles had possibly taken a little bit of LSD when he's talking about tree frogs, whirlpools, and flying bats across the moon. You know, who knows? Anyway, Charles is making it sound idyllic. But yeah, there was the sex side of their life, there was the pink room, and as will often happen, as will often be the case, without them being able to control it, gossip begins, and in the nearby towns, a rumour starts to spread that there are two queer devil worshippers having sex parties in their home. Now, whether we're really talking about sex parties or not, that can't really be verified. But what we do know is that Joe and Charles, they did get some visitors. They often entertained friends at their home and in the Pink Room. Sometimes these were friends who were gay, and they would come up for a night to spend some time with the couple, and the night would end in the Pink Room. When guests arrived, they would often be given a tour of the house, introduced to the dogs, and the couple would offer them some of their homemade wine by the pint glass. Jeez, oh, that is a lot of homemade wine. Have you ever had homemade wine? No thanks. I can't really drink wine as it is. I get really drunk really fast. Fucking homemade wine is the worst, honestly. Just like, yeah, what's going on? I just fall through a bush the minute I drink a glass of wine. I'm just like, oh, that's me gone. Sorry, I've lost all ability in my legs. Good night. Anyway, that's what they would serve. And, they had visitors to the house. People would come and see them. And, sometimes it would be men who lived in the local area who were perhaps married and couldn't express their sexuality. They would go to Corpsewood Manor and they would chat with Charles and Joe and know that they were safe and they were secure in that house, because they weren't going to expose anyone else's sexuality. That wasn't what they were about. They just wanted to, live in this place on their own and welcome occasional visitors. Now, one of the visitors who came to see them was a stranger at first. And his name was Kenneth Brock. This is where it gets a little bit horrible and a little bit icky. Kenneth Brock was only 17 when he first visited the couple. Now, nobody can say with 100% certainty that he wasn't a regular visitor to Corpsewood Mansion, and no one can say exactly what happened between the three males. Like I say, Kenneth was a stranger who knocked upon their door one evening and they invited him in. It's known that Kenneth spent some time in the Pink Room with Charles and Joe. Now, there's a lot of speculation around the story, and there's many stories, and I really don't want to do anyone a disservice here. People will say that the couple often invited young men up to see them. Others will say they preyed upon men who were hiding their sexuality, and so they invited them to the manor. But that wasn't always young men. Sometimes, like I said, that was married men who were a bit older and hiding their sexuality. There's also confusion because Kenneth went there voluntarily. Did Kenneth ever tell them that he was 17? There's so many unknowns. And I think it's really hard to go through it and not actually want to jump to a conclusion. I don't want to sell the story as if these were two men, two paedophiles luring men into their house, because I don't think you can really say that's what it was. But we do know that Kenneth was 17. He went to that house and something did happen in the Pink Room. However, remembering Kenneth went of his own accord. It's tricky. It's a complicated one. Kenneth's story that he tells his friends is that he was drugged and raped in Corpsewood Manor. Now, people who knew Kenneth at the time will say that's not the truth. He actually was actively going there quite often because he enjoyed the company of Charles and Joe. But that he was also struggling with his own sexuality and he didn't really want to be gay. So actually the fact that he was going there and was enjoying it was causing him lots of difficulty in the rest of his life. So however that all falls out, it basically comes down to this. Kenneth tells his friend that he wants revenge. He wants revenge for what he deems to be non-consensual sex. Again, others will say it was completely consensual. Kenneth knew what he wanted when he went there, and when he got what he wanted, it terrified him. Again, this is where I'm saying to you, I'm not going to victimise anybody in this story, and I'm not going to say this person was wrong or that person was wrong. I'm just saying to you, that's the very complex set of circumstances. And depending whose perspective you read about it, you'll either believe that they were a pair of Satanists who lured men into their creepy home, or they were just two guys doing their own thing, and that someone came seeking something that they couldn't get elsewhere. So now, it gets even more complex because Kenneth tells his friend, I want revenge for the attack that's happened upon me in their house. But then he also says, they're quite rich, so I think we should rob them. So whether the robbery was part of the revenge or not is unclear, but whatever this thing is, whether it's revenge, whether it's just plain robbery, it leads to this. Kenneth has a friend who was a little bit older than him. Kenneth was 17 and his friend was 30 years old. And he was called Tony West. And Tony was to be the mastermind behind this revenge, this robbery that was going to happen. So the way that Kenneth described it to Tony was that he said, look, these two guys are loaded with money. They're living in the country. Kenneth described it as an erotic castle. Love that. So he says to Tony, look, I want revenge for what happened, but I also think these guys are fucking loaded. We can get some money. So what they do is they don't just jump in. Tony takes time to come up with a plan. And he starts he's never been to Corpsewood Manor. He's never been there. So he starts sort of driving around the area, trying to figure out what are the best routes in and out of the area. Thinking ahead, thinking, well, if we rob them, could we go that road, this road, whatever. And this part, I think this is really intriguing. As a part of Tony's plan, he says to Kenneth, look, they already know you. You've been to visit them a few times. What you could do is, you could go and you could visit them again. Pretend that you are interested in them. Pretend that you want sex. You don't have to do anything. Just get their hopes up. And then the next time that you go back, they will practically be begging you to stay. What to do is gain their trust. So Kenneth, he tries this. Weeks before the robbery is to take place, he goes to Corpsewood Manor. He knocks on the door and Charles answers. Kenneth asks if he can come in, have some wine, and Charles says no. He doesn't let Kenneth in. He closes the door on Kenneth. So that part of the plan hasn't worked. Interesting that Charles closed the door on him. No one knows why. My best guess, and it is just a guess, but my best guess is that being a smart guy, and Charles was smart, I think he worked out that Kenneth was trouble. I think he worked out something wasn't right. And that's why he closed the door on him and didn't let him in. A few weeks after Kenneth had visited Corpsewood Manor and tried to get in. Unsuccessfully, it was the 12th of December. 12th of December 1982. Kenneth, with his friend Tony West, the mastermind, and their female friend Teresa, all got into a car and headed to Corpsewood Manor. Now, why the friend Teresa was there, not entirely sure. Apparently, they had just said to her, "Oh, we're going to go and just mess about with these two gay guys that live in the forest and get into all this kinky Satanism weird shit. So we're just going to go and fuck them up. Want to come with us?" And Teresa came along for the ride. And she said, "Oh, I've heard about this creepy place. I'd like to see it." So, Charles and Joe, they're in their house. They're just having an evening in when they hear a knock at the door. Now, who can that be, they think? So when they open the door, they find Kenneth with two people that they don't know, Tony and Teresa. Now, the three guests standing on their doorstep have brought wine, and they say, "Look, we've just popped by for a drink." Neither Charles nor Joe are particularly thrilled by the arrival, but they can't really turn them away. So what they do is they invite the three guests in. They say, "Come in, have a glass of wine." So the couple, they offer some of their homemade wine to the guests, and the five of them, they sit and they chat and they drink wine. Now, whatever happens over the next 2 hours isn't entirely known, but what we do know is that the five of them end up in the pink room. And we all know what the pink room is for. So it's sitting in the pink room that Teresa starts to feel uncomfortable. She now starts to think there's an edge to Kenneth and to Tony, and she whispers to Tony, "Don't cause any problems here." But he doesn't reply. At one point, Joe gets up. He leaves the room to go to the kitchen and get more wine. And he says to Charles, "I'll be back shortly. I'm just going to get some more wine." And Charles smiles at him. Little did either Charles or Joe know this would be the last exchange that the couple would ever have. Once Joe has left the room, Kenneth, he gets up too, and he says he's going to the car to get something. So this leaves, sitting in the room, in the pink room, Charles, Tony, and Teresa. So Charles is essentially with two guests that he's only really met that night. He doesn't really know them. Pretty soon Kenneth is back. And the thing that he had to get from the car was a rifle. So Charles, well, he looks a bit shocked to see the gun. And he tries to kind of make a joke about it. I think he says something like, "Ooh, bang bang," but he's drunk and it's not really clear what he said. Now Teresa has seen the rifle. She's starting to get scared and she wants to leave. When Charles stands up to adjust a lantern in the pink room, Kenneth jumps up, pulls out a knife, holds it to Charles's throat and says to him, "Okay, tell me where the money is." Charles says, "We haven't got any money." Teresa is now shouting, "Kenneth, please don't hurt anyone." Kenneth uses the knife to cut up some bed sheets, and he ties up Charles, and he's still demanding money from him. He leaves the room with Charles tied up, and he crosses to the house where Joe is in the kitchen. He's in the kitchen pouring more wine when suddenly Kenneth appears with a rifle, and he points it at him. Now, just to warn you, this may be upsetting. Alfie, cover your ears. Kenneth points the gun at Joe and fires 4 shots into his chest, killing him instantly. He then turns the gun on the 2 dogs sitting nearby and shoots them both dead. In all of this horror, Tony, the supposed mastermind, and Teresa, they have made an attempt to run. This has gotten way out of control for them. I think for Tony, this was just a sort of fun idea, and now it's actually taken such a deadly turn. So they run to the car that they arrived in, but the engine won't start. And so Tony and Teresa, they're panicking, they're thinking, fuck, what do we do? And so they think, let's go back into the house and we can convince Kenneth to just run with us now, out of the situation before it gets any worse. Now, they don't know that Joe and that the dogs are dead. As far as they know at the moment, Charles has just been tied up with some bed sheets. Fine, that's enough for them to be like, let's just get out of the situation. When Tony and Teresa get back into the pink room, Kenneth is still screaming at Charles about money, demanding to be shown the money, and Charles is trying to say to him, I don't have any money in this house. Kenneth picks Charles up and he drags him out of the pink room to the outside, planning to drag him back to the main house. As they pass the kitchen, Charles is being dragged when he sees his lover Joe and their 2 dead dogs lying in the kitchen. When Charles sees them, he moans and he tries to reach for Joe's dead body, but Kenneth won't let him, and he drags him in to the living room. By this time, Tony has located the gun that he had brought with him. Now, although only minutes ago, bloody Tony was trying to run away, he's now waving a gun around in the situation, and he's pointing it at Charles. Charles keeps saying, there is no money in this house. We have nothing. We don't even have electricity. We have nothing. Tired of hearing this now, the 2 men with guns are becoming really frustrated. So, Charles gets up and he tries to go to Joe's dead body. He just wants to lie down next to his lover, Joe. And it's right now that Tony says to him, sit down or you will be next. Charles ignores this, and Tony fires a shot into Charles's face. As Charles lays on the floor, both Kenneth and Tony fire shots into his body until he is dead. The 2 men now ransack the house. But just as Charles had been saying, there was no fucking hidden treasure. There was no hidden gold in this house. These men had very, very little money. The only thing of worth, the actual only thing in the whole house of worth, was Charles's harp, and it was too heavy to carry. So with literally a few small bits of worthless jewellery and a really small amount of cash, Kenneth, Tony and Teresa, they leave. They take Joe and Charles's car and they flee Corpsewood Manor, leaving the two men and the two dogs dead. They've left behind utter devastation. And for days, no one knows that this has happened. Why would they? The creepy house is so isolated that none of the gunshots would have been heard. It so happens that a friend of Charles and Joe was dropping by to give them some news when he discovers the absolute scene of horror. Right, now you can imagine the press, the headlines. Oh my god. Satanic sadists, queers die in sexual bloodbath. House of horror for homosexual Satanists. I mean, the press just went crazy. And, well, the police at this point had a pretty big search on their hands. It was a big, big search. But it didn't take too long until police were hearing the name Kenneth Brock over and over again. And people were beginning to say, oh yeah, Kenneth, yep, he used to go and visit those guys in the woods. He used to go up and see them sometimes. So police think, okay, let's have a chat with Kenneth Brock. They investigate. Where was he? What was he doing? They look through Kenneth's possessions, and it's before too long they start to find things that have come from Corpsewood Manor. Kenneth confesses. Soon after, Tony confesses. And then Teresa backs up the story. She gives her account of the evening, and it matches entirely with what Kenneth says and with what Tony says. And when police look at the scene, everything that Teresa has described, it all makes sense. It all adds up. In court, both men are charged with double homicide and they plead guilty. Kenneth receives the sentence of 3 consecutive life sentences with no chance of parole. Tony receives 2 life sentences and was ordered to death by the electric chair. Now, looking at that, I was like, why would Tony, who is the friend, the mastermind, be given it the electric chair when Kenneth wasn't? But I think it's because he was the mastermind behind the crime. However, upon appeal, the electric chair was no longer to be his punishment, and instead Tony was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. Both men are still alive and still in prison. Teresa was never charged or sentenced, as she had merely been a bystander that evening. And so what of Corpsewood Manor? Well, if you wanted to, you could go and you could visit it today. At first, after all the crimes, police, they sealed off the land. No one was allowed to see it. It became this secret place that no one was allowed to see. But years later, that tape came down. And now people do go and they do visit it. It's become a sort of mythical pilgrimage, I guess, for fans of gothic horror. And there's all the sort of usual things that come up with it. You know, all those things that get attached to like somewhere where a major crime has happened that still exists. People say if you listen carefully, you can hear dogs barking, or you can faintly hear the sound of Charles's harp, and such things like that. So I'm going to leave you with two things. Firstly, the words of Charles, and then the sound of Charles's voice. And you'll hear Charles play the harp and recite a piece of poetry, which for him and Joe was one of their favourite things to do. My message is that we older people are really free, even more so than young folks. And because of our experiences, perhaps at least a little more wise. If we want a different, fuller, more exciting life than we're leading, one closer to this beautiful earth, we can have it. Our only chains are those in our minds. Just promise me that you'll think about it seriously for a while. After all, wouldn't you like to live in your own kind of castle in the country?
When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tiger, tiger burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry?
And so ends the story. Alright then, well there we go. A story with it all. Sex, drugs and rock and roll. Woohoo! Yeah, okay, well, there's a lot going on there. If you wanted to, if you were driven to look up Corpsewood Manor, you will find so much out there about it. You'll find the images, you'll be able to see what Charles and Joe looked like, you'll be able to see what, everybody involved in the whole story looked like. You'll be able to see the actual house that they built, and the two dogs that lost their lives. It's all there. It's all out there for you. I just, this story actually was suggested to me, and I love it when you suggest stories to me. So thank you for doing that. It's really, I really, really, really do appreciate it. Okay. If you would like to help the podcast and support me, then you can do that on Patreon. There's a really good link on the Facebook group to get into the Patreon page, because I think it's a little bit tricky. I'm trying to sort that out, but I don't know why it's so tricky. But if you want to support me, that would be lovely. You can also join the Facebook group, Twitter, Instagram. I'm all over them all. Or you can email me should you want to. Okay, well, until we meet again, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Okay, goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over. Let's get it on. Let's do it. Let's get it over.